She's crazy, man.
Hey everybody, it's Tripl-L and it's a great day for Anime Talks, and today I'm coming in with a Shield Hero differences analysis video, this time with the intent to break down what happened in episode 21 of the Shield Hero anime and show you just how hard the Shield Hero anime is changing things in order to make Naofumi a more traditional hero. And man, this one is going to be juicy because what I'm going to be trying to argue to you is that in making Naofumi seem like the hero in all this, they ended up really taking away from the queen of Melomark. And when you compare the anime and the original work, that conclusion, it's pretty evident, man. So to begin, let's quickly recap the anime's versions of events. And get ready, this is going to be a bit of a long one. So after Naofumi wakes up, the queen comes to talk to him. She informs him of how things were initially supposed to go with neighboring countries. She tells him she was missing because she was putting out political fire, so to speak. She tells him that Tripl-L worships the Shield Hero. She asks to have a private conversation with him. Naofumi reveals that he doesn't want to stay in Melomark and wants to leave. The queen asks him to come to the castle the next day so that they can clear his name. The queen then tells Naofumi of her plans to execute Melty and the king, telling Naofumi it will happen regardless of if he leaves and that it is an apology for his treatment. The anime makes note of how conflicted she is in executing them with a shot of her shaking hand. Naofumi has dreams implying that he's getting cold feet about the execution. At this point, Naofumi is trying to convince himself that they deserve it. Naofumi goes to the castle where he meets the other heroes. The group comes before the queen. Melty and the king are brought before the queen in chains. The queen puts them on trial and televises the whole thing. The king doubts the queen and the queen puts him in his place with ice magic. The queen gives Melty a slave crest, calling her a pathological liar. The queen covers their transgressions in regards to the church. The queen covers Melty trying to kill Melty. The two neutral heroes happen to agree with the trial at this point. The queen ends up covering the accusations against Naofumi. Spear Hero gets to do the lie detection with the slave crest. Spear Hero makes a funny face. Naofumi monologues that he has a heavy heart. The king pleads his case and shakes the queen a tiny bit. The queen strips the two of their status and sentences them to death. They get taken to public execution in a weird looking plaza. The anime again shows the queen being emotional about the whole affair. Motoyasu looks away from Melty when she pleads for help. Mine begs for Naofumi to save her. The queen starts to waver. Naofumi calls it off and starts mocking them to win back the crowd. Raftalia is proud of Naofumi. The queen is relieved. Naofumi proposes changing their names. The queen allows it and makes it official. The Three Heroes Church is officially abolished by the queen. Naofumi calls the queen a shrewd politician, taking advantage of the situation to also announce the whole thing with the church. Naofumi opts to work with the queen and everyone else at the end of the episode. The queen reveals that she would have killed herself in exchange for the lives of her family if Naofumi didn't step in, adding that she was going to beg for their lives. Okay, Rue, that's the bullet points for the anime. You might find it to be a bit of an aggressive recap, but it needs to be there for you guys to properly appreciate the differences. Just want to make sure you just go back to this part of the video if you need to hear it again. But now we move on to the novel version of events, and it is significantly longer because novels do that. But here we go. After Naofumi wakes up, the queen comes to talk to him. The queen asks him to accompany her back to the castle. Melty notes that her mother is very angry, and Naofumi notes that he can see a vein popping out from her forehead. The queen notes that she wouldn't do something as foolish as attack Naofumi in response to his suspicions of her. Naofumi reveals that Melty told him that the queen had been ripping up portraits of the king and her sister and been setting them on fire. Naofumi narrates that he's suspicious of her and is trying to figure out why she would defy the Three Heroes Church, and during that notices that her hand was shaking. Hearing her say, Altkray, i.e. the king, Melty, this isn't the end. Naofumi notes that she is definitely angry. A shadow shows up as well, and well, I'll just quote the light novel word for word on this one. He was holding portraits of trash and he quickly pasted them up on the wall. In a flash, the queen summoned magic icicles. She threw them at the portraits, pinning them to the wall before summoning flames to burn them to ash. That's not enough, not enough. I want to see their faces twisted in fear. That is the queen saying that. To which Naofumi noted he would have liked if she had her freak out in private and that she looked unstable. Naofumi chooses to trust the queen in regards to accompanying her to the castle and does so. On the way to the castle, the queen brings along Melty, Melty, and the three heroes with a special note that Melty is tied up and gagged. Naofumi was at the front of the three heroes line. Or sorry, I guess the four heroes line. During this period, Naofumi reveals that the church disciples told him that church members were being arrested. Then we head to the throne room. The king questions why Melty is gagged while he is sitting on the throne, with the queen responding that Melty doesn't know how to shut her mouth. The king orders Naofumi captured upon seeing him enter the room, to which the knights present ignore. The king accuses the queen of not being the real queen. The queen puts him in his place with ice magic. The queen criticizes the king and slaps him a few times, and then criticizes him for trying to start a war, and then continues to rip him apart with him not being able to say anything in defense. The queen officially introduces herself to the three heroes. Motoyasu and the queen have a back and forth about Mine being gagged, and the queen relents that she has no choice if Motoyasu wants to hear her complain. Multi lobbies the accusation against Naofumi. That accusation, and the queen reveals she isn't buying it with the extra detail that she knew that Multi wasn't a virgin. Multi tries to cover with Motoyasu, saying he was her first, and her mother calls her out on the lie. The queen states if she had a relation with Naofumi, however, she could maybe save her, to which Naofumi retorts not to make him throw up. The queen talks about politics between Mellomark and Siltvelt. She tells the heroes that Siltvelt worships the shield hero. They have a small aside about political marriages. We go back into it. Naofumi observes that the queen is an experienced diplomat when he sees how she's trying to get him into the Mellomark royal family. The queen berates Multi for not trying to domesticate Naofumi, noting that if she did, she would have had the throne. After Multi lies a bunch, the queen has the slave crest applied. Naofumi uses shield prison to stop Motoyasu from interfering during the slave process. The queen starts the lie detection process. The spear hero gets to do lie detection with the slave crest. The two neutral heroes agreed with Multi being a terrible person at this point. The king blames Naofumi for his daughter being a liar. Naofumi wonders why the queen didn't make the king a slave. The queen disowns the pair and strips them of their nobility to the point that Multi can't call the queen her mother. Naofumi started enjoying what he was watching. The queen states that if they were repentant, she would have figured out some way to petition Naofumi for mercy. The queen tells Naofumi that she had thought of ways of earning his trust in the case that the two truly apologize. Multi reveals that she has a faction that would rise up if she was removed. The queen in turn reveals that she silenced said faction during the 3 months she couldn't be in Mellomark. The queen then covers how things were initially supposed to go with neighboring countries. Naofumi and the heroes react to being told that there was supposed to be an order to when the heroes were summoned. They react kinda, well, surprised, I guess is the best way to say it. The neutral heroes criticize the queen for leaving Mellomark with a warhawk, to which we go into a very long conversation about what the queen was trying to do. The queen reveals that she wanted to avoid war with Siltvelt, and that is why they had nobles who wanted to help demi-humans in Mellomark. In return, Siltvelt would do the same thing for the humans in their country after seeing that Mellomark made the first move. The queen acknowledges that she is being open and that she is showing Naofumi preferential treatment on the grounds that Naofumi has suffered the longest, to which the neutral heroes agree. The queen states that the king's incompetency totally ruined the demi-human strategy, ruined diplomacy with the other countries, and nearly brought war to the country, largely fueled by his continued discrimination of Naofumi. She reveals that Siltvelt and Shieldfrieden were so infuriated that they could have attacked at any time. Naofumi notes that she single-handedly kept the world from war and that she is a skilled diplomat. The Three Heroes Church is officially abolished. The queen then asks the spear hero to leave. The queen says there are still punishments to go for the pair. The queen decides to have Multi pay off the debt that she has accrued, including the money she took from the treasury and the money it took to put out the forest fire that she started. The queen notes if she saves the world with the heroes, she'll overlook it maybe. The queen gives Naofumi the right to decide how to punish the two. Naofumi immediately exclaims, "Death! Put them to death!" Naofumi laments that maybe death will finally quench his hate for them. The queen, Ren, and Itsuki all consider death to be appropriate. The queen questions if death will truly satisfy Naofumi. The queen considers torturing them, letting them think that they're safe, and then killing them when they finally have a smile that it's over. Then she considers domesticating them as pets, to which everyone notes that, holy this lady is dangerous. Are we sure she's not actually the real mastermind behind everything? Naofumi understands what she is trying to say. She was saying that Naofumi could do whatever he wanted, but she didn't want them killed. She'd punish them in some other way. The queen points out that using her authority to kill members of royalty would hurt international standing, and that killing the king in particular would cause giant trouble since the king was a hardcore war hero. Naofumi suggests ripping off their arms and feet instead. Raphtalia is concerned about Naofumi. Multi begs for Naofumi to save her. Naofumi then decides to do the name swap. The news gets delivered to all villages and towns in the kingdom about the name swap. The queen forces the king and Multi to bend the knee to Naofumi in response to when the king tried to get Naofumi to bend the knee. They start talking about a few more political things after the pair is removed from the room, but maybe we'll talk about that some other time. The queen bows before Naofumi, admitting that Mellomark needs him, and then offers her head if that would soothe his anger, and promises that in exchange for forgiveness she will sign a magical contract that prevents Naofumi from being treated unfairly. Naofumi observed that the queen used her authority to save her family and was ready to give up her head. Naofumi acknowledges that he could rally the rest of the world and destroy Mellomark, as according to what he learned from the queen, but he decides against it and tells the queen that he'll trust her once. And we're good! Okay, so there was a lot, and that's to be expected. Novels always pack more info, but the important takeaways here are how much alterations occurred between the two iterations when it came to the power dynamic. Here's the fact, relatively speaking, the anime queen is significantly less competent than the original queen. A lot of aspects are maintained between the two, but the way they are executed really bring down the character. And this isn't just an issue of volume, this is an issue of what the character did in pivotal moments. So let's jump into the analysis, the first big thing. Where you had the anime queen making a gamble for the outcome that she wanted, you had the original queen forcing the outcome she wanted. This changes the power dynamic entirely, because in the anime, Naofumi has all the power. He received a bigger pivot point. It was up to him to be the good guy and the anime queen to believe in him and put faith in that. Original queen wasn't playing that game. Original queen gave Naofumi the illusion of a choice. And the moment that Naofumi falls to his hateful ways, the queen doesn't pull out. Instead, she ups the ante and engages with Naofumi's darker and vengeful side and diplomatically changes his mind. No matter how you look at it, the character that forces outcomes through communication will always trump the character that throws everything into the air and hopes for a good solution. That's not to speak badly of the anime queen's resolve to off herself, however. It's appreciated. But Original Queen had that same resolve. It's because Original Queen had that resolve that the anime adapted it. And you know, very quickly, props for the anime for keeping that little element in and putting it in there, expressing it in another way. But we have to point out, the Original Queen's move was going to accomplish more. Here's why. Original Queen entirely used her own personal power and experience to get Naofumi to back down and save her family. That's all her skill as a politician. Her offering her head, that was the move to save the country, after she had already gotten her family in the clear. This lady was ready to go down for the rest of her country, but only after securing her family. Not only that, the Original Queen, all the way throughout, was consistently floating to Naofumi that she was looking for ways to save her family. Every single moment she mentioned it, she was putting all her cards out in the open. She was being very frank with Naofumi. That's how you write confidence in ability and diplomacy. And is miles superior to the anime queen, who tells Naofumi what she's going to do and then hopes that his better nature will prevail. Although at this point, in terms of diplomacy, it's important to note that both the anime queen and the Original Queen dealt with the negotiations with the other countries. But when Naofumi calls the queen a shrewd politician, the Original Queen really earns it and then some in comparison to the anime queen. The anime also tries to do a lot in making the queen seem like a reluctant participant in all this. I mean, that's what all the shots of her reacting or her shaking are there to convey. They want to convey that she doesn't actually want to kill her family. They want you to like the queen more and feel bad for her. Original Queen also conveys this sense that she wants to save her family as well, but without all the scenes of visual weakness. She conveys it in the way that she flat out tells Naofumi to back down, and she conveys it in the results that she chases after. Original Queen ends up being more nuanced, since she is a character that shows us what would happen if you have a character who is trying to prevent all-out war while her family is actively sabotaging her. With this character, of course she'd be pissed. Now on the flip side, the anime downplayed how much of a disaster this whole situation was. But it's important to note that her anger would have been justified. Regardless, this again seems like a situation where the anime refused to depict a character that wasn't easier to distinguish morally. With Anime Queen, you get a clear sense of, yo, this is a lady who has to make an example for the sake of world peace, but is really hurting on the inside, evident by the way she collapses. Versus, yo, this lady is pissed. Yeah, she wants to maintain her family's life, but good God, is she serious about the torture, man? That's messed up. Holy. Look, man, flat out, the Original Queen, she ain't the character that collapses on the floor hoping to appeal to a man's better nature. Original Queen has seen too much and I believe it whenever I read her. On another note, we have to acknowledge that Original Queen addressed the whole thing with political factions. Like, you know, Mine's faction that she offed and the King's faction. And at that point, I gotta say, the King is an unfortunate sacrifice here as well. So listen, here's the reality. In both continuities, anime and novel, the King is a respected war hero. The anime King falls under the same logic and consideration as the novel King. Why? Because the story requires him to be the war hero who has battle buddies and be the guy who is renowned throughout the world. The story in the future requires that fact. That cannot be changed. Therefore, the anime queen looks like she's about to commit a political disaster. The anime queen jumps the gun on executing her husband. And while she did intend to go with her plan to try and save them, what would have happened if Naofumi didn't want to do it? What would have happened if Naofumi didn't agree? She got lucky that anime Naofumi is less hateful. But regardless, original queen holds the edge here because she just flat out tells Naofumi no, and then she tells Naofumi why the king can't be killed. And heck, it's actually telling the original queen didn't float the idea of executing them from the very beginning like anime queen did. That was the last thing that she even brought to the table. Also, in pointing out little things regarding political factions, the original queen was paying more respect to little details that occurred in the arc. For instance, this arc featured shots where you saw the king bothered about the demi-humans, and also you had Idol the Noble. Idol himself was foreshadowing that the king was a war hero because Idol himself had noted that he fought in the war alongside the king. The anime can get away with it though, because if they don't tell viewers about it, you probably wouldn't know where to look and you wouldn't be bothered about it. If the anime doesn't tell you that Multi has a faction rooting for her, you wouldn't think that she does, even if it makes sense to think that she would, given how terrible she is and how nobility-based politics usually work in fiction. And you know, we talk about the queen, but we can't leave Naofumi out of this. After all these maneuvers were done for his sake. This hasty execution, as opposed to the light novel equivalent of a private trial, was all done to make Naofumi the hero, to make Naofumi the one who had to take the higher road, to make Naofumi the one who had to have mercy, to give Naofumi a choice in a more dire situation, because we can't have such a vengeful main character. You know, why have the queen so hastily decide to execute? Because it puts pressure on Naofumi. Why have the queen look like she's suffering? Because it tells you that she's not a bad person, and it makes Naofumi more heroic when he saves her from all her stress. Why have the queen not try to communicate with Naofumi fully and weigh all the options? Because it adds more suspense for that climactic heroic moment where you don't know what's going to happen and the queen is about to pull out the knife. Every question of execution here has the answer of, we wanted to make Naofumi look more heroic. And it's really funny, when I saw Raphtalia in the anime being proud of Naofumi, I specifically remembered that one line that Raphtalia had in the novel. Guys, it's the exact same line. It's Raphtalia saying Naofumi's name. But wow, what a different picture it paints. And that's a big thing. The anime takes little elements, but the way they string them together changes the final product so much. And it's so interesting to see how they can still keep the story coherent. Because even with all these changes, the anime is not bad on a technical level. No, like I've said before, it's different. It's lighter. Compared to the novel, characters are significantly ideal, but the changes that the anime has made aren't that intrusive. It's actually pretty cool to see how they're able to make it feel coherent. But again, through these differences, all I can think is that the anime wants a lighter hero in Naofumi. They want Naofumi to be more in line with traditional heroes, and it's on full display here. Contrasting the Naofumi who is racked with guilt with the Naofumi who is getting more excited as his oppressors are getting more and more ripped apart. It's like night and day. And you know, the changes are still unfortunate in a way, because in the process you lose out on seeing a character dealing with his hate. You know, you lose out on a queen that could expertly navigate a tense situation in search of a compromise, and you lose out on the exploration of the politics of the shield hero world, with also you're kind of losing out a little bit of nuance when it comes to the neutral heroes Ren and Itsuki, just a little bit. You know, for these changes we are sacrificing a few things. That said, people in general like lighter characters. That's what pushes me to say that when I look at these changes, I don't think that they are being done in the pursuit of a greater story. I think they're being done because they want to make the story more appealing to a wider mass audience. I still believe it is totally marketing. So with that, we're pretty much at the end of the video now. And you know, the last thing I could really add to the video is pretty much, well, how do I feel about all these changes? Hateful Naofumi was the point of Shield Hero. Like, he was the main draw. When you have so many anime stories with so many idealistic protagonists, you had Naofumi as the dark sheep of the group. This guy who is very flawed. I thought that was the main gimmick of Shield Hero. I thought that was its wow factor. I thought that's what they did to draw people in. And you know, I'm not gonna lie, there are times where I think Naofumi is too much. I think he is too dark. And also, I read the web novel way back when. I know how Naofumi's story ends. I know the character that he becomes. Like, for me, in some ways, I don't mind getting an ideal Naofumi earlier, but at the same time, like, it was this moment. This moment was the moment that I really wanted to see how anime fans were going to react. How are they going to react to a guy who is not the norm? The point of Naofumi and his journey in Shield Hero is that he is not the typical character. He is not the guy who can overcome his hate, not that easily. And so when you remove that, you kind of remove one of the things that got Shield Hero to where it was most likely. You removed one of the things that made Shield Hero stand out. And I think that's worth keeping in mind. Those are pretty much my thoughts, guys. Also, there's a lot of little details that I definitely missed because there was so many things that could have been said about this episode. Like, there was a lot of good stuff with the adaptation, but, you know, the video is very long enough. Let's call it there. Till next time, I hope you have an absolutely great day.